In the past few months, I've been working hard to finish 2 of my most demanding projects. And in the last 2 months leading up to the deadline, I had to paint every single day in long sessions to make it. During that time, I faced many challenges and learned valuable lessons that I want to share with you in this video. Hi, I'm Zumikito and I paint miniatures for a living. My hands are steady, my patience infinite, and my eyesight questionable. And in this video, you'll discover 5 tips to take on any demanding project, how to manage painting for extended periods of time, and what are the benefits and downsides of narrowing down your focus like this. And the most important part of any big project lies right here on my desk. Now, before you say that it has to be a plan, well, yes, but actually, no. You see, I do think that you need to have a general idea of where you're heading with your project, whether it's an army or a display piece, but many times you can just start without a precise plan. So, what is this? I hear you saying. Am I just bullshitting? Well, this is a checklist, not a plan, and I use it in a very different way from one. If I was about to compose a plan, I would write down all the steps I need to go through and just do them in that order without a second thought. And you can use your checklist like this for sure, but if you have a big project that can't be broken down into these granular steps, you have to be more fluid. So what I do is use it in 2 different ways. The first way is to use it as this kinda mental accounting tool. You see, when you start any given model, most likely you will start with the part that's either the largest or the most important. You don't really need to plan for that, and for the first few bits you can progress like this without much of a problem. However, as I started painting the skin of this miniature, I fully realized how many details there are to paint. So what I did once I finished the skin is that I broke down the entire miniature into separate units that have to be painted. It's up to you how you wanna break it down, but for example what I did is note down the different elements that could be painted together. This makes sense because that means that you can use the same paint. So the Harbinger of Decay was split into armor, cloth bits, wooden bits, copper non-metallics, and so on and so forth. Sometimes I also grouped certain bits together because it made sense to finish them right away. So for example, the shield was finished in one go, even though it has wood and copper on it, but it made sense to me as a partial goal. And that's exactly the point here. By using a checklist, you can keep yourself accountable and motivated by crossing off different items. But also, it's a good way to stay organized for a big project. Which ties in with the second way that I use my checklists, which is to note down the mistakes. During the long painting sessions, it's not always convenient to fix your mistakes right away. So you can either tell yourself, what do you mean by mistakes? Just don't make them and get good, or, just be a reasonable person and fix them later. But if you do that, you have to 100% write down which parts you have to fix. If you don't, you'll forget it and you're f***ed. It will also put you at ease because now you can just progress faster and fix everything that you noted down as the last thing. The next lesson that I learned actually came up before the painting marathon, but it was solidified by it. If you remember the Krieg Sergeant that I painted, as well as the dual piece between the Groth and the Nurgling, they share one important thing. And this is not a good thing, it's a bad one. All 3 miniatures are very simple, and therefore there isn't much to look at. You see, if you have dog shit and you put sugar and candy on top of it, the dog shit doesn't get better, it just gets bigger. Now obviously I am being a bit too harsh here, but the theoretical dog shit in this case is the concept, which has to be really good. I am not saying that there is some glaring obvious mistake on these 2 pieces, it's just that they aren't as interesting as they could be. So even though I do like them as they are, if I wanted to make them more impressive for a competition, starting off with a better concept helps tremendously. So with the Krieg Sergeant, I could just add 2 more soldiers around him to make a nice unit. and that immediately gives you way more stuff to look at. This was the same theory behind painting this Incubi unit as well as the Nurgle unit. You know, for example, the Lord of Blight miniature that I started way earlier this year was pretty interesting already, and I liked it a lot, but at the start of the project I knew that I also wanted to feature the Harbinger of Decay, as well as one extra Nurgle dude. Furthermore, I have used magenta and purple colors for the shadows, to later put them on this kinda purple, amethyst, magenta base. This color choice is not random either. I actually looked up the Age of Sigmar lore and found that there is this realm of Shyish. And because I have a strong presence of orange and green on the miniatures, I wanted purple on the base to finish the secondary color triad. And then I also made sure that the miniatures are put in the right place, so everything that's important is clearly visible and it forms this nice triangle, which is a pleasing composition to look at. Now, am I saying that you should do the same? Well, initially I wanted to say no, not really, but actually, if you're about to spend a lot of time on your project, the concept better be pretty good. You know, like the dual piece took me over 100 hours, because there was some sculpting and going back and forth, but because the concept is not that impressive, neither is the result. And speaking of going back and forth, that's actually the next thing. If you're like me, you study a wide range of other painters and their tutorials. And in many of them, it seems like they start with a primer and then perfectly apply 7 layers without going back, and they are done. However, if your project takes a lot of time and somewhere in the middle of the process you find something you don't like, this approach is not possible. So although many times it's presented that painting is a linear process, that's just not the case. I already mentioned that I use checklists to note down any adjustments that will be made later, and those don't have to be just the mistakes you made, but anything you wanna change. For example, coming back to the skin of the horse, I had to come back to some of my darker layers multiple times, just to spread them a little more, because it's very difficult to know how much to spread them with your first pass. Also, there will be a full step-by-step series on Patreon for this mini. The tutorial for the skin of the horse is already out, and so is the series for this miniature. So check it out, there is a link in the description. But anyway, if you feel like you have to progress in particular steps from A to B, and from B to C, and so on and so forth, well, take that idea and throw it out the window, because that's just not how it works. On this project in particular, I tried this linear progression, but it just wasn't possible. I had to come back to many bits multiple times to be truly satisfied with them. And yes, this does take more time, but in the end you'll be more satisfied with the result. And after all, that's why I dedicated so much time to it. Now let's talk about 2 things that might give you a second thought about doing similar kinda painting marathon. See, during those 50 days when I had to paint for a long time, I had to fight my body as well as my mind. So what does that mean exactly? Most painters I know have videos or podcasts in the background whenever they are painting, and I am no exception. However, if your painting sessions are long and frequent, that's a recipe for a disaster. To listen to something information heavy when you're supposed to focus is obviously disruptive. Obviously, if you're painting 50 miniatures that are exactly the same and you don't have to think about it too much, then it's different and probably fine. My projects, however, required my full attention. So once I realized that listening to podcasts is counterproductive, I just stopped. So there is a time and place for that, but maybe not when you are in this kinda try-hard painting mode. And even if it didn't distract you at first, after listening to stuff for 8+ hours in a day, it'll make you tired and mentally drained for sure. I would suggest replacing videos, movies, and podcasts with subtle music. At least that's what I did. I can imagine painting in silence might be even better, but Jesus Christ, you have to draw the line somewhere. And now let's talk about arguably the most challenging aspect of this 50-day period, and those are your physical limitations. Maybe you don't know this, but I wear contacts, and after long painting sessions, and especially late at night, my eyes get very dry. A solution for this problem is very easy. Either get some glasses or eye drops, or, both. Aside from that, I also experienced back pain, but if you exercise, and especially you do back exercises and you stretch a lot, it's quite manageable. Anyway, it also helps that I am using a height adjustable desk, so I don't have to paint at exactly the same position all the time. However, one thing that I didn't expect and that happened around the final week or so were finger cramps. Sometimes when I focus, I squeeze my brush really hard, and that makes the muscles in your fingers quite tense. Given the amount of hours I painted, in the hindsight it's to be expected, but it never happened to me before. This was without a doubt the most difficult hurdle, because it was one thing that forced me to take breaks. Running cold water also helps, but if you have someone special to give you hand and finger massages, yeah, I definitely recommend that. So, should you consider doing something similar if you have the conditions? Well, it really depends. On one hand, I can totally advise people to take their time on a piece that they really like, because it will 100% push them further. I do think that working on these projects pushed my technique very far, but at some point you are also hitting diminishing returns. If you are on a deadline, I guess it's more justifiable to have a painting marathon like this, but if your painting sessions are way too long, then it might be a bit too much. So what I would propose instead is stretching your painting marathon and shrinking your painting sessions, because that will definitely make it more manageable. On the other hand, longer painting sessions might be better if you need to get into the flow. This is especially important for me because I find it difficult to even start painting if I know that I can't paint for at least an hour. So ultimately, whether you should or should not attempt this depends on what are your conditions, whether you are on a deadline or not, and of course, what are your goals. Now, I didn't really talk about painting as much in this video, but if you're interested, I actually talk about the painting approach for these minis in this video. So check it out, and see you there!